Okay, so lesson 3.1 is about linear equations and two variables. And the first thing that we're going to do is graph all of these ordered pairs right here. Again, this is review from pre-algebra, so everyone should pretty much have that done. And so if you're watching the video, go ahead and pause it and plot your points and then unpause it to check your answer. For the class right now, I'm going to go ahead and show you my answers so you can check them. Okay, so what you're wanting to do, you'll notice it's a circle. So you're going to want to check the letters. Make sure you place the letters in the right area. It forms a circle with the center bullseye. You might have them all plotted correctly, but you may have labeled it incorrectly, which means that you rose instead of ran when you, or vice versa, when you plotted your points. Okay, so are there any questions on this part of the notes? Okay, let's go ahead and go to page 2. Nope, that's the answer. All right, page 2. So what we're going to be doing for this page is you're going to be given an equation and you're going to create a table and then plot those points to graph the line. Some of you may not even need a table. Some of you may be able to say, I understand this equation well enough to just graph it. And that's great. We're going to do that on the next page. But right now, I want you to complete the table. So I'm going to start the table off. And this column is our X. And then we're going to write the equation in the second column. This is our Y. And then in that final column, you're going to write out the ordered pair. So when you're solving an equation, the X and the Y in your slope-intercept equation represent an ordered pair that has been graphed on the line. That's all that is. So whenever you're doing your homework, you're going to be asked to most likely create a table. And it's always good to have a negative, a 0, and a positive. So we're going to make this pretty simple. We're going to put in for X -1, 0, and 1. Okay. Now, the way we're going to solve these is we're going to rewrite the equation in this box right here, but we're going to substitute X with the -1. But don't forget that this negative X right here is a -1X. So really you're multiplying -1 times whatever X is. So we have Y equals -1 times -1 plus 2. Okay. And then you can solve this. So we have -1 times -1 is 1. And 1 plus 2 is 3. So our Y is 3. And then we can write out our ordered pair as -1, 3. Okay. All right, let's do the next one. We have Y equals, remember 0 is neither positive nor negative. So when we plug 0 in for X, it is just 0. 0 plus 2. And 0 plus 2 is 2. So our ordered pair here is 0, 2. Next one is Y equals a -1 times 1 plus 2. -1 times 1 is a -1.
Where are you getting these numbers?
-1 plus 2, hold on, is 1. So good question. When you're asked to create ordered pairs out of an equation, you pick whatever points you want, unless they give them to you. So that's what I meant when I said you might want to have a -0 and a positive. So I just chose -1, 0, and 1. I chose them myself.
Okay.
So on your homework, I would like you to choose these points for any equation that asks you to create a table. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we are going to plot our ordered pairs here and then graph our line. So I'm going to plot -1, 3, 0, 2, and 1, 1. Yes, you do need to plot the points, and yes, you do need to draw the line. For some reason, some people don't draw that line. And you need to do that. Okay. So are there any questions on how to do this type of a problem? Paige? It's okay. Because there's a negative right here in front of the X. Okay, no, that's okay. All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to do the exact same thing for example 2, use the same -1, 0, and 1, fill out your chart and graph your point, and then we'll come back and you can check your answer with mine. Okay, so this is the table. And then this is your graph. So you want to make sure that your table and your graph are correct. Is there anyone still working on this? Okay, let's go ahead and move on to page 3. Oh, answers, I keep doing that. Okay, so on page 3, you don't have to create a table now. You're going to just look at your equation and be able to graph it. And some of the students in my last class said they remember doing this, but they forgot how. So I'm just going to refresh your memory on how to do this. So your equations are all written in slope-intercept form. And it's written in slope-intercept form because M represents the slope and B represents the y-intercept, where your line is going to cross the y-axis. So this B right here is the 2 in that equation. And so you're going to take that 2 and you're going to plot the ordered pair 0, 2 on your graph. Okay, so that represents 0, 2. So let's go ahead and plot that. Okay. And then you're going to look at your slope, which is the M. And in our equation here, it is the 3. Now your slope is really 3 over 1. Since it's not a fraction, we could put it as a fraction. Your 3 shows that you're going to rise 3, and your 1 shows that you're going to run 1. So starting at my y-intercept, I can graph my slope by rising 3, 1, 2, 3, and running 1. Rise 3, run 1. How many points do you need to create a line?
2.
Only 2. Only 2. Now, I tend to plot about 5 points. That is not required. But one thing that I want to show you that you're not used to is that you don't only have to go up and to the right. I can go down 1, 2, 3 and to the left to continue my line. So why can I do that? So if I go up and to the right, I'm going up 3, which is positive, and to the right 1, which is positive. That gives me a slope of 3. However, if I go down 3, that's a -3. And if I go to the left 1, that's a -1. -3 divided by -1 is a +3. It's still a positive slope. Okay, so if you say you plot your point up here at the 10 and you can't go up anymore, then you're going to have to plot your slope downwards. Okay, so once you create your line here, let's draw it out, and that's what that should look like.
Do we need to have a ruler like Mr. Mac would take credit off if it wasn't a straight line? She said if it wasn't fairly straight.
If I cannot read where your points are at and the line doesn't go through your points, then yes, I will take points off. But if I can read it and I can understand it, then good. So for some reason, some people don't draw their lines through their points, and you need to make sure you do that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna do number 5 now. And then I'm gonna have you do 4 and 6 on your own. Okay, so let's go down to number 5. So on number 5, the +4 represents my y-intercept, which is 0, 4, and I'm going to plot that point on the graph right here. -1/3 represents my slope. So what that means is I'm gonna rise 1 and run 3, but it's negative. So that means one of my directions needs to be positive and one needs to be negative. Because -1 over 3 is -1/3. 1 over -3 is -1/3. So when it's negative, one direction is positive, one direction is negative. So what does that look like? If I go up 1, that's positive, but then that means I need to go into a negative direction. So I need to go to the left. So I'm gonna go up 1 and over 3. I think some of you have been taught that if it's negative, you have to go down and to the right. So let's go down 1 and over 3. But both ways is correct. Whenever you have a negative slope, just one of your directions needs to be negative and one needs to be positive. Because remember, a negative and a positive, when you're dividing, is a negative. Okay, so now we can draw our line. Right, are there any questions before you do the 2 on your own? Okay, one thing to notice is that in number 4, this negative x is a -1x. So you're gonna rise and run 1, but remember it's negative, so your slope should represent a negative slope. Okay, I'm gonna give you a little bit to do these 2 problems. Okay, so this is example 4, check that one. And then if you're done with example 6, go ahead and check that one. I'm gonna move it down. Okay, let's go ahead and go to page 4. Now what we're doing is we're working with real world situations and we're creating graphs based on that situation. But the first thing you need to do with the word problem is come up with an equation. So let's look at this word problem. It says that the perimeter, the perimeter P for a square equals 4 times the length of the side. Now we already know how to find the perimeter of a square. Everybody, by this time, I think we know what the equation is, but let's just look at this one. It says P equals 4 times S. It's pretty much what it is. So we're gonna write this out. P equals 4 times S. You could put L for the length of the side. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to graph it. But before we graph it, we are going to label our graph. It's really important that when you are doing real world situation graphs that you give it a title and you label the X and the Y axis. So what helps me to do that is to create a table, an X and Y table. All right, does anyone know what letter in our equation represents the X? S. That's I said letter, I should have said variable. And that means that P represents the Y. Okay, so remember earlier I said I want negatives, 0, and positives. What's wrong with that though in this table? Yeah, we don't have negative measurements, so we're gonna do positive. And so all I'm gonna do here is the sides are gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay. And then I can figure out my perimeter. So now that I know what my X and Y is, I can label my X and Y axis. If my X is the length of the sides, then I can just put here length of side. And if Y represents my perimeter, I can put perimeter over here. And then I need a title. I'm just going to put square perimeter. Okay. A title could be anything you want it to be as long as it is related to the problem. So, yes, Jake? because then you don't even have a square. You could put 0. I don't care if you put 0. Okay. All right. Now I need increments. So on my x-axis, my increments go all the way from 1 to 5. And we have a lot of squares here. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll skip a line. So I might write it like this. This is 0, and then I skip a line 1, skip a line 2, skip a line 3. Do you have to do this? No, you don't have to. It's just something that I do. Now I'm going to figure out what my perimeter is going to be so I know what my increments need to be on the y-axis. So remember that our equation is P equals 4S. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply 1 times 4, and I get 4 for the perimeter. 2 times 4, and I get 8. 3 times 4 is 12, 16, and 20. Okay, I'm going to stop here because I'm going pretty fast. I want to make sure everybody understands and see if there's any questions that anyone may have. Okay, so let's look at the y-axis here. I need to go all the way up to 20, and we're not going to skip 0. We always want to start at 0. There are a few exceptions, and that's when you have really high increments that are all smashed together. So like if my perimeter started at 500 and then 501 and then 502, 503, we'd have to kind of tweak our graph a little bit. But because they're spread out and we have enough room for 20, then we're gonna have even increments starting at 0. Now I know that there's only 15 boxes here. That's not enough to go all the way to 20. So I'm gonna go by 2s. Does that make sense? So we're gonna do 2, 4. Okay. And now you can plot your points over here on your graph. So we have 1, 4, 2, 8, 3, 12, 4, 16, and 5, 20. And then you can draw your line. So any questions on that? Right?
Is it okay if I didn't count it in 2s?
What'd you count it in?
Just the ones that
So you skipped the 20? You didn't do 20?
yeah, no, I just did the equation without doing counting it in 2s, and so like, so it's 5.
That's okay. Yeah. All right, let's look at example 8. We need to come up with the equation first, and then we can graph it. So it says the cost C of baking X cookies is $5 plus $2 per cookie. All right, so let's read this again. The cost C of baking X cookies is $5 plus $2 per cookie. Where is our variable X going to go? With the 2, because per is our clue word. Each cookie is $2, and we don't know how many cookies we're gonna bake. So let's write out this equation, and I'm gonna write it out as 2x plus 5 because that is the correct way to write slope intercept. Okay.
Can you do it like that? Can you do it 5 plus 2x?
So you can do it without being wrong, but I want you to get in the habit of writing it in slope intercept. Yes. Can I what? Oh, yeah. Like this, right? Okay. So now when I think about my increments, I do like to create a table, but you don't necessarily always have to do that. So let's go ahead and start creating our graph. And we need to label it, give a title, and create the increments. So give it a title that you want, as long as it's related to the problem, okay? You could be a little bit creative if you want. Can somebody tell me what the title of our x-axis is, Jake?
It would be
Yes, number of cookies. Mhm. Okay, can somebody tell me what the y-axis is? Xavier?
Cost of cookies. or
Yep.
not.
Yep, cost. Okay. Does anyone know what the increments are gonna be without doing a table? About? Matthew? Yes, you're gonna go up to over 1 and you're gonna start at 5. So I think we could go by 1. So let's go ahead and put our increments in. This time I'm not gonna skip a line, but you can if you would like. Oh, yeah. Okay, so what Matthew was saying is that you know you have to start at 5 and you know you're gonna rise 2 up 1. Okay, so going by ones would be fairly simple. So using what we did on the previous page with graphing equations, we should be able to graph this one. 5 represents our y-intercept, so we're gonna plot a point at 5. And then we're gonna rise 2 and run 1 for our slope. Rise 2, run 1. Okay. And there we have graphed that problem. Now, by looking, if someone were to be given this graph, they should be able to read it and understand to know what the problem is. So if they weren't given the words, but they were given the graph, they should be able to come up with these words on their own. Because a graph is used to visualize data easily. Okay, let's flip it over. We have 2 more problems for lesson 3.1. What I would like you to do before you do anything else is I want you for both 9 and 10, I want you to write out your equations. Okay, so go ahead and try to figure out what those equations are. Okay, so this is the equation you should have gotten for 9. Now, if you wrote it out as G equals Q divided by 4, I need you to get out of the habit of using that symbol for division. Because we're in algebra, we write it either this way, Q divided by 4, or 1/4 Q. Okay, so let's get out of the habit of doing that. Okay, and then for 10, you should have gotten this equation. Any questions? Okay, this is what we're gonna do now. I'm gonna give you 3 minutes per graph to graph them, and then we're gonna come back and check, and then we'll move on to lesson 3.2. Okay, so go ahead and set up your graphs or your tables or both and graph them. You can check your first graph.
that's the wrong route.
Oh, that's the wrong one. Oh, it is the wrong one. Okay, thank you. Number 9, go ahead and check number 9. And then in a couple minutes, we'll check number 10. Here is graph 10. This one was very similar to the first, actually was number 7 that we did. Except it was the slope was 4 instead of 3. So you should have something similar to this. Okay. All right, and that concludes lesson 3.1.